What if you took off on a clear afternoon, flew over calm water, and simply never came back? No crash, no wreckage, no bodies, no goodbye, just silence. That is exactly what happened on December 5, 1945. 5 U.S. Navy planes left the coast of Florida on a routine training flight. 14 men were on board. The sky was clear. The planes were fully fueled. Everything looked perfect. Not one of those men ever came home. They vanished over the Atlantic Ocean, and to this day, nobody knows exactly what happened. Then the Navy sent a rescue plane to find them. 13 more men. That plane also disappeared. No trace, no wreckage, ever. 27 men, 6 aircraft, gone within hours. Was it human error? Was it something science cannot explain? Or did someone in power know exactly what happened and chose to bury it? Today we go deep into all three of those possibilities. We look at real military records. We follow the last radio transmissions. We examine evidence quietly removed from the official Navy report. Stay until the end. Because we have uncovered a detail the Navy kept hidden for decades, a piece of evidence that changes everything. Most people who cover this story never mention it. It is worth the wait. Now let us go back to where it all started. It is December 5, 1945. World War II ended just months earlier. The world was breathing again. Soldiers were coming home. The danger was supposed to be over. At Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station in Florida, 5 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers were scheduled for a training mission. These were not small planes. They were heavy, powerful wartime aircraft, built for combat, strong and reliable. The mission was called Navigation Problem Number 1, a simple triangle route, fly east over the Atlantic. Complete a practice bombing run, turn north, then head back west to base. 2 hours, nothing complicated. The man in charge was Lieutenant Charles Carroll Taylor, 28 years old. Combat experienced, a trained Navy aviator. He was assigned as flight leader just hours before takeoff after another officer asked to be removed from the mission that morning. That small detail would later matter enormously. At 2:10 p.m. all 5 planes lifted off. The sky was clear, the sun was up, there was no reason to worry. Nobody on that base knew they were watching 14 men fly for the last time. Imagine being thousands of feet in the sky. The sun is setting, ocean stretches in every direction, no land in sight. Your compass is spinning, your leader sounds nervous, your fuel is running out. That was the reality for the men of Flight 19 that afternoon. The first leg went smoothly. They flew east, reached their target area called Hen and Chickens Shoals, dropped their practice bombs, and completed the run without trouble. All Taylor had to do now was turn north and head back west to Fort Lauderdale. But around 3:30 p.m. something went wrong inside his cockpit. His compass stopped working correctly. At least that is what he believed. He looked at the islands below and tried to match them to the Florida Keys. But he was not looking at the Florida Keys. He was looking at the Bahamas. To the east of Florida, not to the south. This single mistake would cost 27 men their lives. At 3:40 p.m., a nearby pilot named Lieutenant Robert Cox picked up a strange transmission. Both compasses were out. The voice sounded uncertain. Cox radioed back. Taylor identified himself. He said he did not know where he was. He could not find west. Think about that. The flight leader. A combat veteran could not find west. Cox told him to fly north and west toward the mainland. Taylor agreed. For a short moment it seemed manageable. Then Taylor changed his mind. He convinced himself he was over the Gulf of Mexico on the west side of Florida. He was completely wrong, but he acted on it anyway. He turned his planes east, away from land. Out over the open Atlantic, the other pilots followed. They had no choice. Taylor was the leader. You follow your leader. That is military discipline. But at least one other pilot believed they should fly west. A transmission was captured saying that flying west would bring them to land. Taylor overruled it. He kept flying east. Every mile east was another mile from safety. Every minute was more fuel burned. The sun dropped lower. By 4:45 p.m. the base was alarmed. Radio contact kept breaking up. The direction-finding equipment pointed east, far east. Taylor had been flying the wrong direction for over an hour. The base tried to relay his true position. The signal was too broken. Taylor never received it clearly. By 5:50 p.m. the sky was completely dark. The planes flew blind over open ocean. Taylor told his men he did not know where they were. He said when the first plane ran out of fuel, they would all go down into the water together. He was preparing them for a crash landing in the Atlantic at night. At approximately 7:04 p.m. the last transmission from Flight 19 was recorded. faint, broken, then gone, no mayday, no final position, no goodbye, just static where 14 voices used to be. When planes go down over ocean, things float, fuel slicks, cushions, life vests, pieces of metal, something always surfaces. From Flight 19 nothing was found, not one piece, not one body. The ocean gave absolutely nothing back. Then the Navy sent out a rescue plane, a large PBM Mariner with 13 men on board. It took off at 7:27 p.m. from Banana River Naval Air Station. And it too disappeared, no distress call, no wreckage, no survivors. In less than 24 hours, the Navy had lost 6 aircraft and 27 men in the same stretch of ocean. When something goes wrong in the military, there is always an investigation. You find out what happened, you assign blame, you make sure it never happens again. After Flight 19 disappeared, the Navy did exactly that. They gathered testimonies, reviewed radio transcripts, studied weather reports, and what they found was deeply uncomfortable. The evidence pointed directly at Lieutenant Charles Taylor. To be fair, Taylor was not a reckless pilot. He had real combat experience. He had flown Pacific missions during the war. But capable pilots make mistakes, and on December 5th, Taylor made a series of mistakes that stacked on top of each other like falling dominoes. He reported both compasses had failed. But the other 4 planes had their own separate compasses. There is no clear evidence all 5 sets of instruments failed simultaneously. The Navy's investigators thought carefully about those odds. Their official finding was explosive. Flight 19 was lost because of Taylor's confusion. He misidentified his position. He flew in the wrong direction. He refused corrections from pilots pointing towards safety. Pilot error, named directly, written into the official record. Then something unusual happened. Taylor's mother fought back. She wrote letters, made complaints, pushed hard against the idea that her son was responsible for 13 deaths, and the Navy, under that pressure, quietly changed their conclusion. They removed the direct blame. They replaced it with a softer finding. The disappearance was due to causes or reasons unknown. A trained investigation team had already found the most likely cause, and the Navy replaced it with one word. Why? Because there was more the Navy wanted to hide. Taylor was not supposed to lead Flight 19 that day. Another officer was assigned and asked to be removed hours before takeoff. The Navy replaced him with Taylor at the last minute. And here is what made that decision catastrophic. Taylor had a record. During his Pacific service, he had twice ditched his aircraft in the ocean after becoming disoriented and running out of fuel. 2 separate incidents, both documented in his service record. Both times he was rescued. Both times the Navy kept using him. On December 5th, they put him in charge of 4 other planes and 14 men on a water navigation exercise, with no additional oversight, no safety officer, no backup plan. The failure was not just Taylor's, it was the system's. There is one more buried detail. When Taylor reported compass trouble, the base had a solution. Radio direction finding equipment that could pinpoint his exact location, but it required Taylor to switch frequencies. Taylor refused. He did not want to lose contact with his other planes. That one refusal made it nearly impossible for the base to give him a precise heading home. The window for rescue quietly closed. The investigation also had a pattern of quietly removing sensitive testimony. Accounts describing Taylor's prior navigation incidents were minimized. Witness reports of unusual phenomena that night were collected and then disappeared from the final report. The truth was inconvenient, so the truth was softened. This is documented. This is in the records. The mistakes were real. The cover-up of those mistakes was real. But even accepting every piece of the human error explanation, something still does not fit. 27 men vanished without leaving a single piece of physical evidence. No bodies, no debris, no life vests, nothing. That is not normal. That has never been normal. An institutional cover-up alone does not explain an ocean that swallows planes whole and gives back absolutely nothing, which is why the next part of this story takes us somewhere much stranger. We are going into the Triangle. 5 planes are gone. 14 men are missing. The Atlantic has given back nothing. Now imagine you are a senior officer at Fort Lauderdale on the night of December 5th. Your radio has gone silent. You know those men are either floating in freezing water or they are gone. You have to try, so you send a rescue plane, and then that plane disappears too. The PBM Mariner was a large twin-engine flying boat built for maritime search and rescue. The crew were experienced naval aviators, not students, professionals who knew the aircraft and the sea. At 7:27 p.m., the Mariner lifted off from Banana River Naval Air Station and turned toward the last known search area. 23 minutes later, something happened. A commercial tanker called the SS Gaines Mills was moving through the Atlantic that night. Its crew had no reason to watch the sky, but one crew member on deck saw a fireball, not a flash. A full sustained explosion in the air above the water, a ball of fire that lit up the dark Atlantic and then fell. The crew noted the time, noted the direction. When they reached port, they reported exactly what they saw. The Navy took their statement, interviewed the crew, recorded the account, and then did almost nothing with it. No dive team. No confirmed investigation of the fireball location. No formal conclusion. They simply noted the aircraft was lost and moved on. 13 men on a rescue plane. A footnote. The Navy's explanation was that the Mariner likely suffered a catastrophic fuel vapor explosion. The aircraft had a reputation. Crews called it the flying gas tank because of its tendency toward dangerous internal fuel accumulation. A mid-air explosion was mechanically plausible. But if it exploded in mid-air, there should have been debris. An aircraft that explodes comes apart, metal floats, equipment surfaces, something always remains. Search teams found nothing, no wreckage. No oil slick, no personal belongings, just open ocean. This is where the human error explanation starts to come apart. You can explain Taylor's mistakes. You can explain Compass failure. You can explain institutional politics behind the revised investigation. But you cannot explain 6 aircraft and 27 men leaving absolutely zero physical evidence behind. The Navy launched one of the largest peacetime search operations in its history. They covered approximately 250,000 square miles, aircraft, surface ships, days of searching, and found nothing connected to Flight 19 or the Mariner. The ocean floor in that region drops to extreme depths. Recovery of wreckage at 20,000 feet was impossible in 1945. That is a fair point. But the planes hit the surface first. They broke apart on impact. Debris should have floated for days. The search began within hours, still nothing. The Navy's own investigators were troubled. Internal memos show they did not know how to account for the total absence of physical evidence within a standard accident report, because a standard accident report requires evidence of an accident. There was none. There were other witnesses too. Ships in the area reported lights in the sky, strange reflections on the water, unusual disturbances on the ocean surface in the early hours of December 6th. These accounts were collected by Navy investigators and noted as worth pursuing. In the final report, they largely vanished. The Navy described how 13 men died with a single word, probably. Not confirmed, not proven, just probably. For an institution that files detailed reports on everything, that word is remarkable. It means they could not prove it. It means the Mariner left them with questions they genuinely could not answer. Rather than say that clearly, they chose a word that sounded like an answer without being one. Probably 13 men. Probably the human error angle explains why Flight 19 got lost, but it does not explain the Mariner. It does not explain the missing debris. It does not explain why this specific stretch of ocean between Florida and Bermuda has been swallowing ships and planes for over a century and giving almost nothing back. For that we need to go somewhere official reports never go, somewhere that has haunted pilots, sailors, and researchers for nearly 80 years. There is a region of ocean with no official borders. No government claims it, no nautical chart marks it as dangerous, no warning is issued to pilots who fly over it, and yet for over a century it has been swallowing everything that enters it. It sits between 3 points, Miami in Florida, the island of Bermuda, and Puerto Rico to the south, roughly 500,000 square miles of western Atlantic Ocean, the Bermuda Triangle. Before you decide whether you believe in it, consider this. The United States government's own records contain dozens of unexplained disappearances in this specific region. Lloyd's of London, one of the most data-driven organizations in the world, has acknowledged this area produces an unusual number of maritime losses. And pilots and sailors who passed through it and survived report experiences they cannot put into ordinary language. This is not a ghost story. This is a pattern. The Triangle's reputation did not begin with Flight 19. In 1918, the USS Cyclops vanished without sending a single distress call. It was a massive Navy fuel ship, 550 feet long, carrying 309 men. One of the largest vessels in the fleet, it disappeared somewhere between Barbados and Baltimore, no wreckage, no bodies, no distress signal. President Woodrow Wilson called it the most baffling mystery in the history of the Navy. That was 1918, 27 years before Flight 19. Throughout the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s, ships and aircraft kept disappearing in the same region. The pattern was not random, the incidents clustered. They concentrated in this specific triangle of water again and again. Then in 1945, Flight 19 happened, and everything changed. The scale of that single event, 14 men, 5 military aircraft, 1 rescue plane, 13 more men, all in one night, all in the same stretch of ocean, caught the world's attention in a way nothing had before. In 1974, Charles Berlitz published a book called The Bermuda Triangle. His book laid out the history of disappearances in vivid detail. It explored theories. It interviewed witnesses. It asked the questions official investigations refused to ask. The book sold millions of copies worldwide. Overnight, the Bermuda Triangle became a global obsession. And at the center of that mystery was always Flight 19. Now let us look at the actual theories. The most grounded involves magnetic anomalies. The Bermuda Triangle sits in a region where magnetic north and true geographic north align very closely. In most of the world, there is a measurable difference between the two. Pilots and sailors are trained to account for it. It is called magnetic declination. But in certain parts of the Bermuda Triangle, that declination is effectively zero. Compasses behave differently here. The needle points in a relationship to actual direction that does not match what pilots expect from their training. Taylor said his compasses failed. But what if they did not fail? What if they worked exactly as designed, but the magnetic environment produced readings his prior experience had not prepared him for? What if the compasses told the truth and Taylor did not know how to read that truth in that location? This theory requires nothing supernatural. Just unusual magnetic conditions in a specific area of ocean. It is quiet, technical, and it carries enormous weight. The second theory involves ocean floor geography. The floor beneath the Bermuda Triangle is extraordinarily varied. Parts are shallow, particularly around the Bahamas. But those shallow areas sit right next to some of the deepest trenches in the entire Atlantic. The Puerto Rico Trench drops to approximately 27,500 feet. Over 5 miles straight down into crushing darkness. Anything reaching that depth is destroyed by pressure. Metal deforms. Materials that normally float are pushed past their limits. Recovery is essentially impossible even with modern technology. This explains why no debris was found. Not magic, just the terrifying indifference of very deep water. But it does not explain everything. Multiple pilots flying through this region over the decades have reported a specific and deeply unsettling experience. Their instruments begin behaving strangely. Not just compasses, but all instruments. Altimeters, speed indicators, fuel gauges, everything gives readings that do not make sense. The sky changes around them, a yellowish haze, a strange dry fog. A tunnel-like effect where the horizon disappears, and then when they exit whatever condition they have entered, their clocks are wrong, not slightly wrong, significantly wrong. They flew for what felt like 30 minutes and 2 hours have passed, or they flew for an hour and only 15 minutes elapsed. These accounts come from multiple pilots across different decades with no connection to each other. They did not know about each other when they filed their reports. The descriptions are remarkably similar. If such a condition exists, and the testimony of independent aviation professionals across decades suggests something unusual does occur in that region under certain conditions, then Taylor was not simply making bad decisions. He was making decisions inside an environment that was actively working against him in ways no training could address. Then there is the theory that sits furthest from conventional science. The extraterrestrial theory. It proposes that the Bermuda Triangle sits above an area of underwater alien activity. Some researchers suggest an underwater structure on the ocean floor. Others propose that disappearances represent deliberate collection of aircraft and human subjects. These ideas are easy to dismiss. They lack physical evidence. No mainstream scientific body endorses them, but here is why they keep coming back: the consistency of disappearances, the total absence of wreckage across incident after incident. The instrument malfunctions, the visual phenomena, the time distortion accounts, taken individually each can be explained away. Taken together as a century-long pattern in a specific geographic region, they create a weight of unexplained evidence that is genuinely difficult to simply wave off. The extraterrestrial theory exists because the conventional theories do not fully account for everything. When rational explanations run out, the human mind reaches beyond rational. That is not weakness, that is honesty about the limits of what we currently understand. In 1991, a private salvage company working off the Florida coast made an unexpected discovery on the ocean floor. 5 Avenger torpedo bombers, sitting roughly 10 miles northeast of Fort Lauderdale in about 750 feet of water. After 46 years had Flight 19 been found. The Navy examined the aircraft carefully, reviewed serial numbers and markings, then announced their conclusion. The 5 Avengers were not Flight 19, different aircraft from different time periods. But independent researchers noted the serial number verification process was never made fully transparent. The methodology was not published. The conclusion was stated, but the evidence trail was not opened for independent review. Was it really not Flight 19? Or was confirming that discovery too dangerous for an institution that had spent decades managing a story it could not fully explain? We do not know for certain. And that uncertainty is itself a kind of answer. Every government has secrets. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is how power works. Governments classify information. They control narratives. They decide what the public knows and what it does not. Sometimes that protects national security. Sometimes it protects the institution. In the case of Flight 19, the evidence strongly suggests the United States Navy spent decades protecting itself. Not the truth, not the families of 27 men, itself. Start with the investigation. The Navy convened a board in December 1945. They gathered witnesses, collected radio logs, reviewed weather data, and they reached a clear conclusion. The disappearance of Flight 19 was caused by the actions and decisions of Lieutenant Charles Taylor. They named him directly. They assigned responsibility. That conclusion went into the official record. Then it was taken out. The revision is not disputed. It is documented. The Navy acknowledges it happened. Their explanation is that blaming a dead pilot who could not defend himself required more certainty than they had. That sounds reasonable until you ask one question. They had enough certainty to write the conclusion in the first place. That certainty did not vanish because new evidence emerged. It vanished because external pressure was applied. Taylor's family pushed back and the Navy folded. They replaced a specific finding with 2 words, causes unknown. That is not justice, that is politics. And political decisions about official records create gaps. They leave questions open. They give conspiracy theories exactly the oxygen they need to grow. The Navy created this problem themselves. Then there are the missing testimonies. Researchers who compared early investigation drafts with the final published report found discrepancies. Testimonies present in draft versions were absent or significantly shortened in the final document. This happened around 2 specific sensitive areas. First, Taylor's history of navigation incidents. Multiple witnesses who knew his prior episodes of disorientation over water were interviewed. Their accounts were minimized in the final report. His documented history of getting lost was given almost no weight. Second, witness accounts of unusual phenomena on the night of December 5th, sailors who saw lights in the sky. Ship crew members who described strange disturbances on the water. Base personnel whose equipment behaved oddly during the window of Flight 19's final known position. These accounts were collected. They were noted as worth pursuing. In the final report they largely vanished. No follow-up, no conclusion, no explanation for why they were not pursued. The Navy has never provided a satisfactory public explanation for these omissions. Their standard response is that the final report represents the complete official record. But if that is true, why do earlier drafts contain material the final version does not? That question has never been clearly answered. For years, certain documents related to the investigation remained classified beyond what standard wartime sensitivity required. When researchers eventually accessed portions through Freedom of Information requests, they found something troubling. The file had gaps, not accidental gaps from age or deterioration, deliberate gaps. Places where reference numbers and filing sequences showed documents should be present but were simply absent, and those gaps appeared precisely around the most sensitive areas. Unusual phenomena accounts, early testimony naming Taylor directly, communications logs from the flight's final hours, specific documents in specific sensitive areas, gone. The 1991 discovery of 5 Avengers on the ocean floor is where the cover-up angle becomes most concrete. The Navy moved quickly, dispatched investigators, and within a short period announced their conclusion. Not Flight 19. Serial numbers did not match, case closed, but independent researchers asked detailed questions about the verification process. How were serial numbers read at 750 feet of depth? What equipment was used? What were the specific numbers found versus the numbers expected? Can we see the comparison documentation? The Navy's responses were unsatisfying. Specific serial number data was not released for independent verification. The methodology was not published. The conclusion was offered. The evidence trail behind it was not. It is genuinely possible those 5 Avengers were not Flight 19. The area has seen many aircraft go into the ocean over decades of military training. Finding 5 Avengers there is not impossible, but the Navy's handling looked like an institution with a conclusion ready before the investigation was complete. Because if those planes were Flight 19, every buried question would immediately resurface. The revised findings, the missing testimonies, the sealed records, the gaps in the file. All of it would be back on the table, and the Navy was not ready for that table. Here is the broader truth worth naming directly. In 1945, the Navy was at the peak of its prestige. World War II had just ended. Public confidence in the military was enormous. Into that moment of peak prestige came the loss of 27 men in coastal waters with no explanation. That story was dangerous, not because of what it proved, but because of what it suggested. That the most powerful Navy in the world could lose 27 of its own men and have no idea why. The pressure to contain that story did not require a shadowy cabal of senior officials in a dark room. It came from the simple universal instinct of powerful institutions everywhere. Protect the image, control the narrative, keep the uncomfortable truths inside the building. That instinct is human, it is understandable. And when it involves the deaths of 27 men and the truth owed to their families, it is deeply and completely wrong. We have come a long way together. 5 planes into the sky, 14 men. Last broken radio transmissions, a rescue plane climbing into the dark and never coming back, a Navy investigation that reached honest conclusions and then buried them, missing testimonies. Sealed records, a century of unexplained disappearances in a specific stretch of ocean. Now we have to do what the Navy never did, sit down with everything, lay it flat on the table. And try to answer honestly, what really happened to Flight 19? Here's what we know for certain, not theory, documented fact. 5 TBF Avengers took off at 2:10 p.m. on December 5, 1945. They completed their practice bombing run without incident. Taylor reported compass trouble at approximately 3:40 p.m. He became convinced he was over the Gulf of Mexico when he was actually over the Atlantic east of the Bahamas. He flew east instead of west. His crew followed. The planes burned through their fuel going the wrong direction. Last confirmed transmission at approximately 7:04 p.m. Not one piece of physical wreckage ever found. A PBM Mariner rescue plane took off at 7:27 p.m. with 13 men. It disappeared 23 minutes later. A tanker crew reported a fireball in the sky. The Navy never confirmed it. No wreckage from the Mariner was ever found either. Those are the facts. Everything else is interpretation, so let us interpret honestly. The human error case is strong. Taylor was in an unfamiliar area. His compasses gave readings he did not trust. He made an incorrect geographic assumption and acted on it. He refused to switch frequencies when it could have allowed precise direction finding. He kept changing course, burning fuel, moving further from safety. These are human mistakes. The kind that happen when experienced people face unusual situations and fall back on instinct over procedure. The magnetic anomaly theory adds weight here. If compass readings in that area genuinely did not behave the way Taylor expected from prior experience, his confusion was not simply stubbornness. He was operating in an environment his training had not prepared him for. The total absence of debris can be explained by ocean floor geography. Wreckage in 20,000 feet of water in 1945 was effectively unrecoverable. The Mariner's disappearance, while disturbing, has a mechanically plausible explanation in the aircraft's known fuel vapor issues. The cover-up was real, but it was institutional self-protection rather than concealment of a specific discovered truth. The Navy changed findings, removed testimonies, and sealed documents not because it knew something extraordinary, but because it knew something embarrassing. There is a difference. Both are wrong. But they are different kinds of wrong. For many people, that explanation is enough. But here is the thing. It works beautifully right up until the moment it does not. It does not explain why not a single piece of debris from 5 aircraft was found in days of intensive searching that began within hours of the planes going down. Ocean floor geography explains deep recovery limits. It does not explain why nothing floated on the surface in the immediate aftermath. It does not explain the pattern. Flight 19 happened in a region with a century-long history of unusual disappearances. The concentration of incidents in this specific geographic area is not random distribution. It is a pattern. Patterns mean something. It does not fully explain the accounts of other pilots who flew through the same region and came back with stories of instrument failure, visual distortion, and time anomalies. These are trained aviation professionals. Their accounts deserve more than dismissal. What if the Navy sealed certain records not because they knew the truth and were hiding it, but because they genuinely did not know the truth and could not afford to say so? What if the gaps in the file are not hiding an answer, but hiding the absence of one? Here is the most honest verdict available. The most probable explanation is a combination of human error and environmental factors. Taylor became genuinely disoriented. The magnetic conditions contributed to his confusion in ways beyond simple instrument failure. He flew the wrong direction. His crew followed. The planes ran out of fuel over deep water in the dark. The cover-up was real but limited. Institutional embarrassment managed, not extraordinary truth concealed. And the paranormal angle, the triangle's history, the magnetic anomalies, the reported time distortions, the extreme ocean floor geography, represents a genuine layer of unexplained phenomena that the human error narrative does not fully absorb. That is the most truthful verdict the evidence allows. A tragedy born from human error, amplified by unusual environmental conditions, swallowed by one of the most extreme ocean environments on Earth, and then mishandled by an institution that chose its image over the truth owed to 27 men and their families. But here is what we must also acknowledge. 14 men flew into the Atlantic on December 5, 1945, and whatever they experienced in those final hours went with them into the deep water. No black box. No final written account, no recovered body. The truth of their last hours belongs to them, to the dark water that took them, to a stretch of ocean that has been keeping secrets for a century. The most human part of this story is not the military failure, not the cover-up, not the paranormal theories. The most human part is simply this: 14 men left for a routine flight. They never came home, and the people who loved them spent the rest of their lives in the endless agony of not knowing why. That agony does not have a theory, it just has a weight. A weight that sits in the space between the last radio transmission and the silence that followed. And in that silence, every question about Flight 19 lives. Waiting, December 5, 1945. 14 men climbed into 5 planes on a clear Florida afternoon. They had jobs to do, homes to return to, people waiting for them. They flew east into the Atlantic. The Atlantic did not give them back. Nearly 80 years have passed. The ocean floor still holds whatever truth exists about that evening. The Navy's files still contain gaps that have never been explained. The families of 27 men never received the full accounting they deserved. And that stretch of ocean between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico still carries a reputation that the world's best scientists and investigators have not fully explained away. 3 things brought us here today: a series of human mistakes made under pressure by a man who could not find west in a sky full of stars. A patch of ocean that behaves in ways that defy ordinary expectation, and an institution that chose its own reputation over the truth it owed to the men it sent into that sky. All 3 of those things are true, all 3 matter, and none of them together fully close the case. Now here is the detail we promised you at the beginning. When independent researchers accessed early investigation drafts in the 1980s and 1990s, they found something sitting in an archived file for decades. A personal note from one of the investigation board members, not part of the official record, tucked inside the file alongside the formal documents. The investigator wrote that in his personal opinion, the most troubling aspect of the Flight 19 case was not the disappearance itself. It was the fact that multiple independent radio operators on separate frequencies reported hearing transmissions that appeared to come from Taylor's flight several hours after the fuel on those aircraft should have been completely exhausted. Transmissions after the fuel ran out from planes that should have been at the bottom of the ocean. He noted these transmissions were not included in the final investigation report. He raised the issue with senior members of the board, and the decision not to include them was made above his level. That note was never published, never part of any official statement. It sat in a file for decades until a researcher found it. What does it mean? Instrument ghosts can create false transmissions. Radio waves behave strangely over open ocean. There are technical explanations, but there is also the possibility, small and unproven and impossible to entirely dismiss, that those transmissions were real. That somewhere over the Atlantic in conditions we do not fully understand, 14 men were still trying to find their way home long after they should have been gone. That possibility has no resolution, it simply exists, in a file, in a note, in the silence between the last known transmission and whatever came after, and that is where we leave Flight 19. Not solved, not closed, not fully explained, just out there, somewhere over the dark water, still flying. If this story stayed with you, drop your theory in the comments below. What do you think happened? Human error, the triangle, a cover-up, something nobody has considered yet? Tell us, we read every single one. And if you want more stories that go deeper than headlines and ask the questions the official record refuses to answer, hit that subscribe button, because we are just getting started. The next story is already waiting, and it is darker than this one.